Could please take their seats. We're going to get started. We actually have an online audience for this session too, and we want to get started fairly promptly so they're able to join us. Great. So hi, my name's Scott Mazarski. I head up the digital and events business across Bloomberg's industry verticals. And I want to welcome everybody and thank everybody for coming to the second in our series of events focused on the future of nuclear energy. We held our first event in April at the Bloomberg New Energy Finance Summit, which convened energy leaders from all around the world to discuss pressing issues around the future of energy. Today's discussion is really at the heart of what we do at Bloomberg. We convene thought leaders to talk about some of our nation's most important issues, particularly when those issues are at the intersection of business and government. I want to thank our underwriter in Nuclear Matters, who is the underwriter not only for today's event, but for the entire series that we're doing. They've been great to work with, and we genuinely appreciate our partnership with them. We're really excited about the group of speakers that we've assembled today, and we're equally thrilled to have Chris Gadomski here. Chris heads up nuclear research for Bloomberg New Energy Finance, and he's going to get us started today with a conversation with John Kotek. John is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Office of Nuclear Energy in the Department of Energy. The Office of Nuclear Energy is responsible for conducting research on current and future nuclear systems, maintaining the country's nuclear research infrastructure, establishing a path forward for our nation's spent nuclear fuel, and a host of other issues. John, prior to his appointment, John was managing partner of the Boise office of Gallatin Public Affairs, a public affairs and strategic communications company. We're really excited to have him here today, and with that, I'll turn things over to Chris. Chris?
John, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I want to welcome all of you to today's event, and I also want to welcome all of you who are watching this online in the comforts of your home or your office. And I hope that we have, and I'm sure we will have, a wonderful day today. So, John, Twitter is very, very important to our society, and for those of you who are going to be tweeting or doing social media, it's #nuclear going forward. But in reviewing your history of tweets, I found out that we have three things that are in common. One, that we're both energy policy geeks. Two, that we are proud parents. And three, that we're lousy golfers.
That's it. That third one's, it hurts, but it's true.
That's true, great. So you started your career at DOE many years ago. I won't give the exact number because when I do that, I embarrass myself. So you just spent some time out west and you've come back. So what I'd like you to do today is to share with the audience your views and the audience views and the administration's views of where we see nuclear fitting in U.S. society, in U.S. power generation. And to start off, perhaps you can tell us how have things changed from the time that you left Washington many, many years ago and now have come back.
Yeah, and appreciate you trying to cover up how long I've been at this, but I'll admit to it. So I started with the Energy Department in 1989. And was there through 1998 for my first go-around. And it's interesting, as I look back on those days, what I'm struck by is how the things we were working on then are paying off now. So, for example, the work that was being done on developing new light water reactor designs led to things like the AP1000, being built here in the U.S. and in China, led to an advanced boiling water reactor design from General Electric. There was also work being done on things like higher burn-up fuels, right? Trying to provide the technical basis for fuels that could stay in reactor longer. Those types of fuels are now widely in use in the U.S. Work that we did back then on trying to work with industry to try to establish the technical basis for license extension for going beyond the initial 40-year operating period. That has turned into, 3/4 of the fleet having, roughly speaking, achieved or received approval to go beyond 40 years and operate out to 60 years. So a lot of the things that were happening then are paying off now. And it underscores to me the fact that this is a long-term business, right? And the types of things that we do in technology development can take decades to pay off, but they're important to do. And that's why I'm so excited about the research portfolio we have today, thinking about what it might turn into 20 years down the road.
Great. So why don't you talk to us about what you're focusing on now today, because you're in charge of nuclear research, and where you see that going forward, and is there an opportunity to sort of speed that process forward or so, or do we need to go through all the diligent steps necessary to make sure it's done right?
Well, and to your last point, that's always a question we're asked, and of course then you get into regulatory space and the NRC and questions about other things that can be done there to move the regulatory process along faster. But to your first question about what we're working on now, first we're looking at the current fleet. Again, as 60% roughly of the low carbon generation that we have here in the U.S., the administration sees our current operating plants as an important component in keeping carbon emissions low and meeting climate goals. And so we're doing research, first looking at going beyond 60 years, right? We talked earlier about going from 40 to 60 years in terms of license terms. Now we're looking at, through our Advanced Light Water Reactor Sustainability Program, can we go beyond 60? Could we go to 80 years, for example? All right, so we're working with industry there to see if we can establish that technical basis. We're also looking at what we call accident-tolerant fuels. Are there fuel designs that we can develop, certified, get licensed by the NRC, that would be more tolerant of accident conditions, give operators more time to respond, and hopefully minimize or even eliminate damages and offsite consequences as a result of an accident. So we're looking at things like that associated with the current fleet. Looking a little bit further out, where through our small modular reactor program, we're trying to work with industry to develop nuclear product offerings that could serve more than just the sort of the traditional large baseload generating needs that the current plants serve. So we've got a very active program there, and hopefully within the next year or two, we're going to see a design certification submitted to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. Looking even further out, we're looking at a wide range of advanced reactor technologies, whether it's sodium-cooled reactors, gas-cooled reactors, salt-cooled reactors, that could offer an opportunity to make very large improvements in areas such as safety, waste, economics, proliferation prevention, that may represent the long-term future of nuclear energy. So we're looking across that sort of spectrum of technologies, looking out to a very long-term time horizon. We're also trying to ensure that we've got the manpower, right, and the scientists and engineers available in the pipeline to meet future needs for both operating facilities, designing facilities, working on other DOE programs like our cleanup program, our nuclear nonproliferation programs, and other nuclear-related things we do in DOE. So one of the things that my organization does that I think is particularly useful is we provide approximately 20% of our R&D budget to university research. And so we use that as a way to not only meet programmatic needs, but also to ensure that we've got people coming through the educational pipeline to meet future mission needs.
Great. So tell us, Bloomberg loves numbers. So can you give us an idea of what the nuclear budget is that you're managing?
Sure.
And how is that trending? And how does that, do we anticipate it trending upwards, downwards in the future?
So the current budget for my organization is a little over $900 million a year. and we're operating in government fiscal year 15 right now. The request that we made for fiscal year 16 was basically the same level. And both the House and Senate Appropriations Committees have acted on our appropriations request for next year. And actually both bodies increased our funding. And so what I'd say is, while it remains to be seen how the House and Senate reconcile the differences between their two bills, we're looking at probably close to $1 billion budget with my organization next year. Just to break that down to give folks a sense of what that means, roughly $500 million in R&D funding plus the design work we're doing on SMRs, about $300 million for infrastructure. So we maintain, or my office is what we call a landlord for the Idaho National Laboratory, the nation's lead nuclear energy lab. And so we provide the funding for the test reactors and research reactors that exist on that site, the other facilities that are there to do, for example, post-radiation examination of nuclear materials, or to do modeling and simulation work, all manner of activities. And there's also a safeguards and security component to that, because of course we need to ensure that we protect the materials, so the nuclear materials we have at site, protect the reactors, provide cybersecurity protection, that sort of thing. So that's about a $300 million piece of the budget. And then there's about another 80 million or so that goes to that actually support the federal staff and the things that my folks do both here in Washington and out in our various field offices. That's roughly how it breaks down.
Right. And how does that $1 billion compare to some of the other generation technologies that exist?
Kind of depends on how you look at it. So if you look at, for example, the Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy in DOE, they've got a budget probably about twice the size of my organization. But then if you look at how that's broken up, you really have, you've got several pieces in there, because you've got an energy efficiency part of that organization, which is pretty big. Then you've got another part that's devoted to renewable energy generation, so things like wind and solar, but other energy technologies. That's about another third. And then you've got transportation technologies, because of course a big part of the emissions that we've got in the U.S. come from the transportation sector. So they're looking at clean transportation technologies. So if you split that bigger program up into the three big chunks that I just described, then they're each roughly comparable with my organization.
Great. So many questions to ask. Is some of our research partnering with other international research institutions, for example, China? Are we doing a lot of work with China? They're building many more reactors than we're building today. Are we partnering with them, and for what goal are we doing?
Well, of course, we've got two separate things there, right? First, of course, is on the commercial side. Right. We've got Westinghouse over there involved in building the AP1000 reactors. On the R&D side, a lot of what we do really is focused more on the long term. So on advanced reactor technology designs and fuel cycles. And so we do a lot of work bilaterally with France, Japan, do a bit with China and some other nations. But it tends to be what I'll call pre-competitive, right? And so it's looking really far out at the long-term future of the nuclear energy enterprise globally.
Right. And that type of international cooperation, how will that benefit companies that are starting up in the United States? I understand there's a large number of small companies that are looking to sort of invest and attract capital investment in the industry. How does that research cycle back to support U.S. industry?
In a number of ways. I think our industry benefits. First, of course, the research itself, right? So particularly when we're doing work that's pre-competitive in DOE, that's research that will be made available for public consumption. And so there are a lot of technical reports, what have you, that get generated from our research efforts, both the ones we do internationally and the ones we do in the U.S. Those prove to be very useful for companies that are looking at advanced reactor designs. And as I'm sure you saw here within the last week or two, Third Way put out a report that cataloged the large number, I think they counted 50 or so, large number of companies that are looking at both advanced fission and fusion energy systems for potential relatively near term to longer term deployment. So those companies benefit from the things that we're doing on nuclear fuels, materials, corrosion studies, you name it. It helps inform their technology choices and what they'd say is retire technological and regulatory risk, right? So they benefit in that way. But there's also a benefit to the U.S. and to our companies from just U.S. leadership in these areas. Because one of the things that comes from these interactions is people see how we worry about nuclear safety. They see how we factor issues of nuclear non-proliferation into our technology choices and into the way that we operate. And we're of the view that to the extent that the U.S. can lead on things like safety and non-proliferation, it both makes for a better global nuclear enterprise and it creates opportunities for companies that already live within that system, right? To the extent that other countries want to emulate that and learn from our experience, we think that gives U.S. companies a leg up to have the relationships that we've got and to be sort of carrying the U.S. gold standard around other countries.
Many of those companies that John just mentioned, several of them are represented in the room. So I hope some of you will have a chance to meet and talk about their plans.
Excellent.
We'll hear from them later on today in our last panel. So, there's been a lot of talk lately about the EPA's plan and talk about the thinking in the DOE and in the administration about the relevance of nuclear power to maintaining or lowering greenhouse emissions in the United States.
Right. Well, so the EPA thing specifically, of course, that's different organization, right? So, I mean, there's an interagency process that goes on. So, we have a role to play in that, but we don't lead it. But I'll tell you, and this will be well known to folks in this room, I mean, really starting at the top at DOE. I know our secretary, Ernie Moniz, is very well known to a lot of people in this room, was a professor at MIT for, 1,000 years or so, and is somebody who really understands nuclear power and nuclear issues more globally. And so, the nuclear industry couldn't ask for a more informed guy at the helm at the department. And I think he's working both within the department and across the administration to ensure folks understand really the important role nuclear has played in keeping our carbon emissions down and can play going forward as a part of meeting any climate goals that are set by this administration.
Great. So your mandate includes managing spent fuel. There's a huge misconception in this country among the people I talk to that spent fuel is a huge problem. And I routinely take my students at NYU to visit spent fuel facilities and some of the reactors near. And I always amazed when I see their reaction that they says, this is all that there is. So you spent a lot of time working in the Blue Ribbon Commission. Talk about the conceptually removing that obstacle in people's minds to nuclear power, and that spent fuel is something that we have a good plan for resolving.
Yeah, and I'm struck by your comment. I'll never forget a conversation I was having with my mother about 20 years ago when I was just starting out in this field, and she was asking about nuclear fuel. And as we had this conversation, it dawned on me that she thought this stuff was a liquid because of the questions she was asking. And of course, to her, fuel is something you put in your tank, and right, I'm a very smart woman, just not, doesn't live and breathe this stuff like a lot of the folks in this room do. And so, little things like that make a big difference. And you're right, when people see what it is you're talking about, this is a solid material. There's a relatively small volume of it. Here's how we manage it, both in pools and then in dry cask storage. And when you start talking to folks about that, it demystifies it. And I think it helps people understand. In terms of a plan going forward, so a couple of years ago, 2013, building on the work of the Blue Ribbon Commission, the administration issued a strategy for managing spent fuel and high-level waste, and has been doing work since then to implement that strategy. And more recently, in the last couple of months, the Secretary of Energy announced that we're ready to move out on two fronts. One is to find one or more sites to host commercial consolidated interim storage, in particularly focused on fuel from the shutdown reactor sites. And then second, to move out on trying to identify a site for a repository for defense wastes and certain DOE managed wastes. And the key in siting both of those facilities would be the use of a consent-based process where we work with states, communities, tribal governments to find what we call a willing and informed host to host new facilities at the back end of the fuel cycle. And that the need to move forward on a consent basis was one of the key recommendations, not just of the Blue Ribbon Commission, but of the National Academy of Sciences report from a few years back. And I think it's consistent with experiences in other nations. I mean, if you look at the success in France and Sweden and Finland in identifying repository sites, they worked very effectively with host jurisdictions and really treated them as partners. And that's the type of approach that we're trying to take going forward with our waste program.
That's one of the challenges that this country faces, which in your hands will have good solutions. What are the other challenges that the nuclear power industry faces in this country, and what steps is the administration taking to sort of try to identify, solve, and move forward?
Well, I mean, certainly we hear about the economic challenges, right? And particularly in the Midwest, and I think a lot of folks in this room have probably been following the attempts in the state of Illinois to provide some, monetization of what are currently not, non-monetary benefits arising from the generation of nuclear power, whether it's low carbon, grid stability, what have you. And so. So there's that sort of thing that's going on and seems to be going on principally at the state level. With our organization, because we're an R&D organization and my part of DOE, it really is R&D focused. And so it's what are those things we can do through our light water reactor sustainability program that allow for safe, reliable, long-term operation of our nuclear power plants.
I'm always impressed when I go to nuclear power plants and I identify some of these or see some of these really bright young people working at the plants, and it's very encouraging. And so, Boston's a university town, and having a viable, strong workforce going for us is critical to the industry. Tell us a little bit more, since we are in a university town, two things. One, what are the universities that have been successful as examples to other universities in sort of working with DOE to sort of go ahead and advance the nuclear research efforts in those universities and to excite students about the possibility of having a nuclear career? And I'd like your personal advice. I think people watching streaming and elsewhere, what is the message to the young people that why should they get involved in such a great technology that is really, really important?
Yeah, and great questions. And as I mentioned earlier, we apply about 20% of our R&D budget to university-based research. What that adds up to is, in the last 6 years, about $400 million worth of university-based research. And you mentioned, Boston being a university town. MIT, of course, plays a big role in that. I think that they've done $20+ million worth of research, or they've also had scholarships and fellowships that we issue. Some of their students have been beneficiaries of those. I see we've got Dr. Gil Brown here in the audience from up in Lowell. His organization, I think he got about $700,000 this year between research grant, a fellowship, and a scholarship. So congratulations on that. So we see a lot here, here in the region in terms of university-based research that really is lending some excitement. I mentioned that third wave report, for example. A lot of, or at least several of, the concepts in the small companies that are trying to advance those concepts came from research here. A bunch of MIT folks come around with bright ideas for the future of nuclear power, and they're running out and trying to make it happen. I think that's fantastic. What we try to do with our R&D program with universities is we try to tailor it so that the work that the universities are doing really is integral to the success of the programs. And so for students and faculty who get involved in that research, they're really making a contribution to the long-term goals of my organization. In terms of advice for folks, one thing that's more and more obvious every day is how international this business is and how a lot of the opportunity is overseas. And so I would encourage students to really look for opportunities in the international sphere. Broaden your horizons, be open to the chance to maybe work on a project that's either a research project, a construction project, what have you, that's got an international component to it, because I think as much as I see that we've got the potential for a bright future for nuclear here in the U.S., other countries are moving forward very aggressively, and that might open up more opportunities for folks in their careers.
According to my accounting, I've got about 2 minutes left, and what I'm hoping to do is to get some questions from the audience. So if you have a question that you'd like to ask, please identify who you are, and please keep it to a question as opposed to a soliloquy, okay? Is there anybody there? We have someone here.
Rod Adams from Atomic Insights.
Hey, Rod.
Have you got any plans for what's going to happen with the money that's left over from B&W not going forward with the mPower reactor?
Good question, and a fair bit of this predates me. As you know, I've been back for only about 5 months. My understanding is in the last budget go around, a lot of that was pulled back by the Congress. So that's the depth of my knowledge on that.
Time for one last question there in the corner.
Howdy, Andrew Dodson. Does the ONR have a public education role on the risks and realities of nuclear power?
Does my organization have a public education role?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, and we've done things over the years to provide educational materials and other information to help promote public understanding. A fair bit of it's been focused on the student population. As we go forward, particularly with the nuclear waste program, I think that's an area that we're going to have to ramp up. And so, having come from a public affairs background, I know how important it is to have materials, particularly available online, for people to reference. But we talked earlier about nuclear fuel, for example, right? There's no substitute for a mock-up. All right, to show people what this stuff looks like, for a video that shows how transportation casks are tested, right? I mean, that sort of thing. And the other thing that we try to do extensively with our Idaho laboratory is public tours. Again, there's no substitute for going out and seeing a reactor facility, seeing the hot cell facilities. We've got a wide range of infrastructure available, and I know it's hard to get a bunch of folks from Boston on a bus to take them out to Idaho. But to the extent that folks that are active in things nuclear, around the country can open their doors to the public, I think that really helps, again, demystify the technology and helps improve public understanding and acceptance.
Actually, taking a bus from Boston to Idaho could be a lot of fun.
Depends on who's on it.
John, thank you very much. I feel much better about where we're going in this country with John positioned near the helm. And so let's give him a warm round of applause.
Thank you.
He's going to go, but I'm going to stay for our next panel. John, thank you.
Thank you.